Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fourth in our series of 40th anniversary speakers who are helping us explore the future of information and the way that we're all going to be coping with the environment that we're seeing develop. My name is Nancy Gwynn, and I'm the director of the Smithsonian Institution Libraries. And this series is being co-sponsored by Anne Van Camp, the Smithsonian Institution Archives, and Anne Spire from the Office of the Chief Information Officer. In fact, she is the Chief Information Officer. And we're very pleased today to have a very distinguished speaker. This is being webcast today. Actually, we're doing it very smoothly today, thanks to our webcast and AV folks. And so at the end of the lecture, when we have questions, I would ask you to use the microphone so that we can be sure to capture the questions and answers for the viewing audience. Well, David Weinberger, our speaker today, has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Toronto, and he began his career teaching the subject at New Jersey's Stockton State College. It's quite a leap from that to his current position, a fellow at the Berkman Institute on Internet and Society at the Harvard Law School. Along the way, he gained experience in marketing, business, and startup companies, as well as maintaining a steady stream of freelance writing for newspapers and magazines such as the New York Times, the Harvard Business Review, and even the Smithsonian Magazine. He writes both intellectual and academic articles as well as humor, which ensures that the former are entertaining as well as conveying serious messages. In 1994, Dr. Weinberger founded the one-person strategic marketing company Evident Marketing, and the next year joined OpenText as vice president of strategic marketing. OpenText was an early search engine company, the first search engine used by Yahoo, in fact, and an innovator in intranet collaborative software. After helping to take OpenText public in 1996, Dr. Weinberger returned to consulting, writing, and speaking, participated in founding a couple of .coms, and served on industry and company boards. In 2000, the publisher Perseus published the national bestseller, The Cluetrain Manifesto, of which he is co-author. In 2007, last year, Times Books published Everything is Miscellaneous, The Power of the New Digital Disorder, about the new principles of digital organization and their effect on knowledge and authority. And that's where I came to know him and to appreciate his views and wanted to bring him here as one of the stars of our speaker series. In this year, last semester, he taught a course at the Harvard Law School called The Web Difference with Professor John Palfrey. Dr. Weinberger is asking big questions about society. For example, he has written, "We're changing the basic principles by which we organize our world. What effect will that have on our institutions and on our way of understanding ourselves in the world we share?" In his book, Everything is Miscellaneous, he takes us on a journey through the human constructs of classification, from alphabetization through the Dewey Decimal System, all necessary but limited approaches to organization that sometimes today seem a bit antiquated. I'm sure his presentation will provoke lots of questions as he talks today about knowledge, noise, and the end of information. So please welcome David Weinberger.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I'm honored, actually, and absolutely not up to the task. So let's begin, shall we? It seems to me that we are emerging from the age of information in a particular sort of way, and that this is both painful and disturbing and upsetting and throws us into an unknown world because we understand information pretty well. But it's also quite liberating and hopeful as well. So I want to talk particularly about the effect that this has, this transition that we're going through, a somewhat violent transition in many ways, intellectually violent, and also in terms of institutions, perhaps. I want to talk in particular about the effect that is having on our idea of knowledge. So we have not just simply been in the age of information, we've actually internalized information to a large degree, the concepts of information, which is odd because when we started in this age, we were quite fearful of it. We resented it. We viewed computers both as instruments of control and of conformity and of efficiency and management. In our popular culture, this showed up all over the place. You know, the do not fold, spindle, or mutilate sort of button that we used to wear in the 60s, those of us who remember the 60s, which is perilously few of us, I can see. So computers, we resisted them. We resented them at first, and we were right to. I mean, basically that notion that computers minimized and enforced a type of conformity is basically right for the 50s and the 60s. So that we all know the people that we were working with, the person in the cubicle next to us, we know all sorts of things about her because we interact with her and we're friends with her. And we also know that to the computer, especially as this age was getting going, person looked like this, minimized, right? The information was born out of a need to control. So you strip things down into a handful of categories, rows and columns view of life, very, very handy, very important. I don't mean to minimize that at all, but we paid a price for it, which was to strip out context. That's where information came from. It was, in fact, the stripping out of context, just as the beatniks and the nonconformists and the hippies were saying, and we were basically right about that. We, of course, got huge benefit from it as well. Somehow we went from resisting and resenting computers to taking over the concepts of information so deeply and so profoundly that we re-understood who we are by virtue of them. So, for example, it is totally cradle to grave. In terms of cradle, we all in this room, I suspect, believe that DNA is information. And if I were to say DNA is not information, you would think that I'm anti-science and ignorant and the rest of it. I am not anti-science, I'm not terribly ignorant, but I do think that DNA is not information. DNA is a squiggly physical molecule that we benefit, we can understand better by applying principles of information science to. But DNA is not information. Yet somehow we've gotten so acculturated to information that sentence, DNA is not information, sounds like it's anti-science. That's cradle. Grave, we have this notion that consciousness is itself information. And some extreme members of our culture, the singularity people, for example, believe that if we can model the brain in a computer, if we can take each of the 100 billion neurons and model them in a computer, then and apply the programming principles of the computer, then the person will outlive his or her own death. And that's wrong, but even the idea that this even makes sense to us, that we know what they're talking about, is a sign of how deeply we've internalized information. So we've swung really wildly over the past 40 or 50 years. How did this happen? Well, I want to go briefly back to the origins of information. 1948, Claude Shannon, who wrote a paper that kicked the whole thing off. It's a difficult paper. It's mainly math. I'm a humanities major. I can't understand it. But he produced a diagram that has become a part of our culture. I mean, this diagram makes immediate sense to just about everybody. So the effect of him has been quite profound throughout the culture, even though it's an odd idea. I mean, the idea is that communication consists of taking an idea, a message, encoding it, putting it through a medium, decoding it, and getting the message back out. And that makes total sense within information theory, but I think it's actually just sort of weird. The strength of Shannon's idea was that he abstracted information from all media. So it didn't matter whether it was, whether you're talking about Morse code or telephone signals or the internet or carrier pigeons or whatever it is, his theory applies. It is absolutely abstracted from the medium, and that's where its strength is. So Shannon takes over a couple of ordinary language terms. It's one of the things that's striking about the paper. It's a hugely technical paper, and yet he's using language, using words that are absolutely in common parlance, and he did this on purpose. So he talks about messages and codes and signals, but the one that I want to focus on briefly is noise. It's an odd choice of a term. Noise is the enemy of information. So that's information going across the top there. Noise is the interruption. It is the enemy of information. Noise is to information as mere seeming is to truth. Why noise? Why that term? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is that he was at AT&T, so line noise could actually be heard, and that's a pretty strong reason. But there's another reason that turns out to be really important as well. The milieu of information theory was World War II. The people who were involved in it and shaped it and disseminated it, many of them came out of working in World War II on projects. And one of the projects was addressed a very discrete problem, which is that battlefields are noisy, and so soldiers could not hear and understand the commands. And so a center was set up at Harvard, and the center studied this and came up with a 1,000-word controlled vocabulary where the words were designed to be distinguishable from one another. So this maps perfectly to Shannon's theory in many ways. So you get, this is where you get, by the way, the Able Baker, Charlie Fox is his Able company. That came out of that project. So these are distinguishable, controlled, distinguishable vocabulary. There's a wonderful book called The Closed World by Paul Edwards about this. It's a great book about World War II's effect on information theory. So you have this theory of information that maps to the battlefield condition, the condition in which you can't hear. That's what the theory arose from. That's why noise is one of the important reasons why noise is so central to this theory, because it grew out of this exceptional case. And so, as happens way too often in philosophy, or in the history of the intellect, we take an exceptional case, like soldiers screaming over the sounds of grinding artillery on the battlefield. We take this exceptional case and we treat it as if it's especially revelatory of the ordinary case. So we end up with a theory of communication that's based upon the exceptional conditions of the battlefield. And that's one important way philosophy traditionally has gone wrong, and I think in this case this is yet another example of it. Exceptions are bad ways to make rules. So we have this case where we have information going across the top, and we have noise is the enemy of information. What's missing here is, because this is a purely formal diagram, right? That's the whole point about information theory. It's abstracted from all of the vagaries of actual media, and yet the real world, the vagaries come back in through noise. Noise is where the world makes an appearance in information theory as an interruption. It's not, so we have the formal perfect realm, the sort of Platonic realm of the transmitting of information, interrupted by the rude, uncontrollable, unpredictable world. The thing that is not abstracted, the thing that is not formal. It's the real thing jutting itself into information theory and appearing as the enemy, therefore, of information. So, information theory and noise as the guise in which the world is able to show itself in this formal theory. So now I want to take a very big step backwards, about 2,500 years, and talk about what knowledge, because knowledge is knowledge of the world. So what has knowledge looked like to us? And this will be very rapid. It's all straightforward. You know all this. In fact, I think you know all of this. But so this is sort of a refresher course on knowledge in the West. And I'm only talking about the West because that's the only thing I know anything at all about. So we have assumed in the West that there is a single knowledge. We do not have a plural in English for knowledge. There's one knowledge because it's of a single world, and thus it is the same for everyone. It's universally true, and boy do we get into a lot of trouble with that one. Nevertheless, it's the same for everyone, and it's simple, not in the sense that string theory is so simple we all should understand it, but in the sense that knowledge explains the chaos and confusion of the world. The world looks like it's chaotic and doesn't make sense, but then we get the knowledge, we get the insight. We pierce the appearances and we see what's the simplicity underneath it, relative simplicity underneath it. We have assumed that knowledge is settled, that once we know something, we move on. We don't keep on knowing the same thing. It would be a waste of time. We know it, we move on. We write it down so other people can read it, and we move on. We've assumed that knowledge is not just a bunch of statements thrown together, but there's an order. It's systematic. It's orderly. We're very fond of this type of order in the West, but in any case, orderly. And we've assumed that knowledge is scarce, relatively scarce. Most of what we believe is not true. Most of it is mere opinion. And only some of those opinions are true. And it's good to be able to tell which are which. Nevertheless, knowledge is rare. That is relatively scarce. So given these assumptions about knowledge, we've come up with a set of tools and institutions for dealing with them. All right? This is one, for example. Perhaps it's familiar to some of you. Where you get thousands of artifacts in a day and you need to categorize and classify them, and you have a large staff of experts who are able to do this. And this is a very, I'm pandering now, but I say this everywhere I've ever used this slide. This is a very difficult skill. This takes a lot of training to do this well. But we know how to do it. We know how to do this, how to take what we know and make sense of it and order it and organize it. Likewise in the news business, we know how to do it. It's really hard. It takes a lot of training and dedication, but we know how to do it. We've gotten good at it. The only issue is it doesn't scale. It doesn't scale real well, because as you're trying to control and organize and classify and manage, that works for the amount of scarce knowledge that we have, but it doesn't particularly scale well because control in general doesn't scale well. You can, if you really try, you can scale even governments to form totalitarian states, but it takes a lot of work. It's really, really hard to do, and they tend not to last all that long, thankfully. Control doesn't scale easily anyway. So this hasn't been a terrible problem for us when it comes to organizing knowledge, because our knowledge has been gated and kept scarce by the physical means that we've used to preserve it and to communicate it. We've been using books primarily. We've been writing things down. And books are physical objects. They're hard to produce. Very few people who want to be authors become authors. It's a one-to-many relationship, and the filter's pretty small. And so that has been a natural literally a natural limitation that has enabled us to build systems that work at that scale, at the scale that atoms allow. It's not a coincidence that many of the salient properties of knowledge are also properties of books. Scarce, orderly, settled, the same for everyone. Those are properties of printing presses, not natural properties of knowledge. The fact that the two have the same characteristics is due to the fact that it's not due to the fact that this is what knowledge is and wants to be and should be. Rather, it's due to the fact that our physical means of communicating and preserving knowledge have been so limited. But now we're entering, we're digitizing everything. And this audience knows I'm exaggerating wildly. But for many people, the vast majority of what they deal with when it comes to information will be digital, even if that's a tiny percentage of the world's resources. Nevertheless, we're digitizing as much stuff as quickly as we can, and increasingly important to all of us. So that means we can now see what noise looks like. This is the internet. The internet has particular properties that you're well familiar with. It's open, it's non-systematic, it's no permission is required, it was built without any managers. I mean, there's nobody with a card, business card that says manager of the World Wide Web. Had there been, the thing would never have gotten as big as it did. It was only by removing permission and removing management that the web was able to scale. And so we have this incredibly messy, disorganized, chaotic fullness of stuff that manifests at every turn, at the nodes and within the nodes, this difference. Not homogeneity, not universality, but difference. People disagreeing with one another. Every point of view, every wrong fact, every right fact, every rumor, every artwork, every piece of porn, it's all there. And it disagrees with itself. Otherwise, the web would be very uninteresting and not at all useful. It's the fact of the difference that makes the web so appealing and so useful, that the pieces are not all saying the same thing or all from the same point of view, which is simply to say that the web is, or the internet is incredibly noisy. It is unbelievably noisy, and that's its strength. So the Sarah Palin page at Wikipedia is a very good page. It's actually a really good source of information about Sarah Palin. But the talk page, the discussion page, is way better. The discussion page, this is just a list of the topics, right? The discussion page is incredible. It is maybe the single best place to go to learn about her, because you get not only the agreed upon language and what got worked out into neutral language, but you get the reasons behind, you get the differences, you get the anger, you get the annoyance, you get people trying to find common ground, because one of the remarkable things about most Wikipedia talk pages is that people who violently disagree agree about the premise of the conversation, that they need to try to work out something, an agreement. So you see the disagreement here, you see the difference. This is where a huge, and the sociological and historical value of a page like this 50 years from now is going to be incredible. You want to understand how people were able to, what people were thinking when the 45th president of the United States, Sarah Palin, was elected, 46, whoever's after McCain. You'll go to this page and you'll see, oh man, she burst onto the scene, this is what people were arguing about, these were the issues. It'll be an amazing artifact. So why don't all encyclopedias show us their talk pages? Well, one can snarkily, when I say one, I mean I, because I frequently have been snarky about this. I could snarkily say, well, they want to have the appearance of authority and they don't like, and there's some truth to that. But that's certainly not what the encyclopedias say. They're saying something very different, which is they look at the correspondence, the email back and forth between their authors and their editors, and they say, well, this is where they're working out bad ideas, right? This is how they wrote the great article that we have, but the back and forth, that's noise. That's a distraction. That's noise. The noise that Wikipedia shows us is the most valuable thing that Wikipedia shows us. I would absolutely maintain the talk pages are almost always higher value than the page themselves. At Wikipedia, the noise is the value. For traditional publishing, nope, those discussions look like mere noise. But it's not mere difference. It's not, what you get on the web is not just a bunch of people who, each of whom are saying something different, like 100 million, let's say 1 billion different editions of the newspaper. Rather, this is a linked environment, so you get these talks to some degree, these points of view, these 100 million points of light or whatever it is, you get them connected and contextualizing each other, which means that we are in a position maybe now to one step beyond, in an Hegelian sense, the old contradiction between objectivity and subjectivity, where objectivity has the weight of showing us the world as it would look if nobody were looking at it. And subjectivity has the benefit of showing us the interior of how people are thinking about it, but you have all these different subjectivities and it doesn't, it's just one person against another person. Well, in a linked environment, in an internet, you don't just have individual subjectivities. What you have is individual subjectivities in various forms of conversation. Some low value, some high value, some academic, some crazy and flaming and hateful and racist. Nevertheless, you have these subjectivities in conversation with one another. And that, in some ways, gives some of the heft of objectivity to subjectivity, to linked subjectivity. So as we move online, the principles of of knowledge, I think, change. And I'm only going to talk a little bit about a couple of these. The main one is this. So in the early 1990s, late 1980s, there were these books written about how we were going to be overwhelmed by information. We were going to drown in it, and we're doomed, and there's no stopping. And it turns out, of course, that the amount of information is orders of magnitude larger than anybody foresaw, but we're really doing pretty well. I'm not overwhelmed in information. I get more spams than I want and so forth, but not at all. I feel better able to find stuff than ever before. They were absolutely wrong. Those predictions were absolutely wrong, even though there was way more information than anybody said. And for a simple reason, we succeeded, because it turns out the solution to the information overload problem is to generate more information, as long as it's metadata. Because metadata obviously lets us manage the information that we have. And we've gotten really good at generating metadata. Not good enough, but lots. We're generating lots and lots of it. And the basic nature of metadata now, I think, is changing. So that we're very used to the idea that there's a difference between the thing and the metadata describing it. You know, the label and the person, or the folder and the label on the folder and its contents and so forth. We've taken that for granted. And we've built complex and extremely useful metadata systems. We would be lost without them that depend upon that, that clear distinction. Well, so you go online, and let's say you have a little piece of metadata, which is the name of the author of a book, and you want to remember what the book was. So you type into your favorite search engine, Herman Melville, and you get back the title of the book, except because everything is online, you also get back now the content of the book, especially if it's not copyrighted. Carefully chosen example. So you get back the content as well. So let's say now you have a different issue. You remember a little bit of the content. Let's say it's the first line. So you put that into the search engine, and now you will get back the name of the author. So the content has become metadata. But you won't just get back the name of the author. You'll get back everything the web knows about the author. To the millionth degree, you'll get back the author, the bibliography, the biology and ecology of whales. You get back the author, a map to the author's house in Pitfield. You get back his social network, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and the time they went up on Monument Mountain and had the picnic, and Monument Mountain and the You'll get back everything. You'll get back Al Gore within 2 steps of this. You will get back everything. So it turns out that the old distinction between metadata and data simply doesn't hold. That metadata is simply the thing that you know, and data is the thing that you're looking for. And that changes, obviously, depending on, So this is fantastic news. It's merely an operational difference, but it's a hugely important and I think wonderful news for us as a species, because we use metadata to pry up knowledge. Here's what I know. Oh, here's what I didn't know. I got it. And if everything now is metadata, all content is metadata, then we just got way, way, way smarter as a species. It also means that drawing distinctions between content and the metadata and the links, it's all connection. It all should be connection. As far as we can, we're going to make everything into a connection. And we'll be smarter for it. Because we're dealing with metadata here, another one of the old rules falls by the wayside. One of the assumptions in the physical world is the people who own the stuff also own the organization of the stuff. If you own the auditorium, you own how the chairs are organized. If you own the clothing store, you own how that's set out. If somebody goes through with a shopping cart making a huge pile of everything that fits her and ignoring everything else, which is the completely rational way of proceeding, by the way, you'll throw that person out because she does not have the right to reorganize your stuff. But online, absolutely, the people will reorganize. And if you don't give them the tools to, they'll either stop coming or they'll go to another site and use the metadata to point at what you have, because pointing is free. Metadata is free. We don't need your permission. And we'll organize it that way. We'll do every possible type of organization, multiple layers of organization, personal organization. We'll aggregate the personal organization. We'll get social organization. We'll do everything we can, because you who own the content do not own the ordering of it anymore. Which means, I think, that really basic principle changes. Which it's a basic strategy for dealing with this stuff, which was minimize. Get experts, exclude from the collection as much as you can to make it anything that's worthless, just to make the collection higher value. And then organize it in ways that will make sense. Anticipate your users' needs, which is what we've had to do. It's what absolutely you have to do with a physical collection, for example. It makes sense, and I know it's very hard, we do it very well, but digitally that doesn't make nearly as much sense as saying, well, no, let's include everything. It's more expensive usually these days to throw things out digitally because you have to inspect them first and decide than it is just to include them. So include everything, which means that, the stuff that, I don't mean you, but I'll say one. the stuff that one might be excluding because it seems trashy, because it's about Paris or Hilton or Britney or Lindsay or whoever, you know, it's sort of trash news. It's not real news, and so you exclude it. That was right when you had limited amounts of space and it was difficult to retrieve things. But in the digital age, no, include it all. Because somewhere, in fact, it's East Anglia, there's going to be a set of academics who are studying the effect of celebrity culture on women in the early 2000s, and by excluding all of those trashy articles, you've just destroyed their research. We had to try to anticipate what people were interested in and how they wanted to search, because we had to. Somebody had to make those decisions. But now we don't, and we never could. We never really could anticipate what people are going to be interested in. An example came up at lunch. I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on Sarah Palin, but I'm about to a little bit, just as an example. What's the name of the town she was mayor of? Wasilla. Isn't it amazing we all know that now? Except me. So wouldn't it be interesting to be able to go back to the town meetings at Wasilla, especially the ones where the librarian was in order to figure out what was truthful and what's not, and all the rumors running around about censorship and so forth? That turns out to be really interesting. But if I asked you last week, okay, we need an archive. How important are the town meetings with the librarian of the 6,000 person town, Wasilla in Alaska? You would put them off with Brittany and the rest of it is, yeah, it's interesting. We don't have room for it. You cannot anticipate what people are going to be interested in. We used to have to, now we don't. So in fact, we don't even have to anticipate how they're going to want to search for things. We can postpone until the moment that a user comes along, deciding how this stuff is going to be organized and be made searchable. And you all know the tools and techniques that are being developed to do this. But it's an incredibly fruitful period in human history that we're able to now, over the course of 10, 15, or now years going into the future, have this compressed period in which we invent new principles and techniques of organization of ideas and information. We've never had a period like this. We've never had an opportunity like this to come up with new ways of doing it. You know how many thousands of years it took to get to alphabetization? This is an incredible period. So, sorry, there's the postpone. We can postpone until the moment that a user asks how we're going to organize the material for her. So I want to give an example, and this will seem perhaps like pandering as well, but I thought about taking this out, but decided to leave it in because I've been using these slides. And I thought, at the very least, I'd tell you what I've been saying about them, because this has become my standard example of a good way of doing this stuff. Have I pandered enough? Anybody here who's been involved in this project? Thank you. I think it's fantastic. I love this example. And people, I'll tell you, so I'm going to step out of lecture mode for a moment. People get this immediately. Everybody responds to it really positively. It's just a wonderful, wonderful example. It's also a really good site. So, okay, so I'll tell you, I don't know, is everybody really familiar with this? Some knows? Okay, so Library of Congress, bless its soul, found 3,000, and so you can correct me when I get this wrong, damn it. Found 3,000 photographs, color photographs from World War II, gorgeous, gorgeous photographs that it had, it needed help. Filling out everything we know about it. So they put them up to Flickr, you know, the Yahoo photo site, and let the public use the facilities at Flickr. So the Library of Congress put up what it knew about it, which is some, not a tremendous amount, but knows some about these photographs, and then said to the public, go ahead, use the tagging, for example, at Flickr. And so you get a set of tags, some of which you would expect from a professional cataloger at the Library of Congress, for example, but many of which were either idiosyncratic or crazy, or you can't figure out why, but some were actually really, really useful. So, for example, Rosie the Riveter a professional cataloger might not have tagged it because this is not Rosie the Riveter. Nevertheless, if you were interested in Rosie the Riveter or interested in the role of women in industry in World War II, this might be a really interesting photograph. It makes sense. Coif, C-O-I-F, coif. Sorry, it's an odd word, isn't it? And it's not a word that's used tremendously these days, but she's got this gorgeous 1940s hairstyle. If you're interested, again, good word to use. Red, because of the little bit of dramatic red on the probe and on her lips. So you get these interesting tags that a professional probably would not have come up with. Flickr also allows you to annotate. You draw a box and you attach text to the annotation. So circle there, those set of nested boxes, that's an argument. The first box says, oh yeah, this photo is totally posed because the nib of her ballpoint pen isn't even extended, which is a really profoundly stupid comment, by the way. And the next person says, no, it's actually, it's not a ballpoint pen. And the next person, nested inside, says, and it is extended. If you zoom in, you can see the thing is extended. So we will use whatever facility is given to us to argue. We are an insanely social species. We will socialize everything we possibly can. And of course, Flickr also lets you add comments. So one of the very first sets of comments that get added, Flickr, it turns out, only allows 75 tags. Because Flickr was thinking people are going to post photos of their uncle on the beach, and you would need the tags uncle, beach, and sunburn, and you'd be done. They were not thinking of historic photos that maybe you need more than 75. So the 75 filled up in a matter of days, and people started hacking Flickr, in the good sense of hacking, using the comments to insert tags. If there had been room for more tags, I would have tagged it whatever. You know, perfectly good use of it, but people also use comments to make more normal sorts of comments about the sociology of the time, role of women, a bunch of questions about and comments about the actual technique, the photographic technique, which somebody at the Library of Congress, maybe somebody here, answers. Very straightforward, friendly way. That person gets some metadata over on the left, that image, saying that this is authenticated. You can believe this. And plus puts in a link to more information, because we always want more information on the web. And because it's the web, within days we get a conspiracy theory. Can it be simply a coincidence that during this presidential campaign, a bunch of patriotic photos have been released? Clearly this is a Republican ploy. And then because it's a web, somebody writes in and says you're an idiot and moves on. So I actually think this is a wonderful example of a whole bunch of things about what we're doing, which is coming up with new techniques for doing this, such as tagging and annotating photos, and we're doing it in public, socially. We're talking in a different tone of voice. Library of Congress sounds like a human being? Oh my God, how'd that happen? Well, it happened because of the web, where human beings could actually talk. And we can see the humanity behind the beautiful facade of the building. So I want to talk about some of the consequences of this for knowledge. I'm sorry, did I now offend people? Have I undone all the pandering that I've done? Okay, you see me afterwards. I'll apologize. So we get to see what happens. Because of this digitizing of so much of the information and the metadata about the information, all in one huge miscellaneous pile, if you will, we get to see what happens to knowledge when control goes down and the amount of metadata and the nature of metadata goes up. And we have an infinite amount of space, we're not bound by four walls, and an infinite amount of connection. You put those things together, which these are things we get for free with the digital revolution, with the networked revolution, and we get to see what happens to knowledge. In some sense, this is knowledge taking a more natural shape, unbound by the limitations of the physical. So I'm going to go as quickly as I can through a bunch of these. First is that knowledge turns into an ecosystem. So that we have Nature continue, Nature magazine, refereed journals, high prestige. They continue doing their work. It's good work. We need them. But we also get variations like PLOS One, which is refereed, but will publish anything even if it's not important. Even if it's not, Nature, it has to be an important article. Well, there's lots of good science going on that doesn't count as important. PLOS will publish it, still refereed. They also, so this is archive. Well, this is an unrefereed place where anybody, any scientist with any researcher with any standing can publish her work before it's been sent or approved by a traditional publisher. So way more stuff, but it's of more uncertain quality. But that's okay because we know archive is very clear about what it's doing. It's not pretending this is refereed. It tells you exactly the nature of the stuff. This is just stuff that somebody submitted. The person has to have a minimal credential, but beyond that, we don't know. The metadata, well, authority has always been metadata. And so the metadata for a site like archive is clear, and we understand the authority. And then you all the way down the chain to where you get sort of jokey, the half bakery for ideas that are clearly maybe not great ideas. But that's fine too. It's funny and the metadata makes it clear. The lack of control manifests itself as complexity. So President Bush 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago I guess now, gave a talk on immigration. And you know that he did what every president does, every speech writer and presidential advisor says, which is keep it simple. Exactly the same mantra as every broadcaster just about, because it's the same thing. It's one to many, and so you want to reach the most people. So in order to do that, you file off the rough edges of intelligence and you keep it simple. Every president. So he gave his talk, 2,400 words, on an immensely complex topic. Oh my God, you know, it's immigration. And within a couple hours, there are 2,400 blog posts. And you don't have to have read them all to know what they're doing, right? It's what bloggers do. You know, you look at something and you sort of hold it up like this and you turn it over and you look at the under and say, oh, did you notice that this is different from what Bush was saying when he was governor? Oh, do you notice this Republican over here, Schwarzenegger, disagrees or agrees, or I wonder how this affects, will this be, I wonder how that. You take something simple and you find something more complex about it and you call it out. And that's what bloggers do, because that's what we do when we talk. This is how we have conversations. We take something simple that we all agree on, and then we start, yeah, no, that was a good movie, but I wasn't sure I'm not sure Heath Ledger really, I didn't understand why. That's what we do. Now we have moments of simplification also, and if you teach, you know, you see this all the time, or if you're a student for that matter, where the teacher puts something simply and you understand it, and as soon as the class understands it, she says, yeah, but it's not that simple, and then you start teasing it out. This is a dialectic. We do this all the time. The problem is that we've had 100 years of a broadcast regime which has an economic interest in being simple. We've had 100 years of that. And one of the ways you can understand some of the enthusiasm for blogging, this sort of irrational enthusiasm for blogging, which I completely share, you can understand some of this as a reaction to 100 years of being treated like an idiot. And now we get to talk and we get to be complex. Oh, did you notice? When you have this sort of complexity without control, you get messiness. So if this is what we look like in the age of information, this is what we look like in the new age. There's lots of information here, right? Information doesn't go away. There's tons of information. There's more information than was ever put into a database. Lord knows, way more than in any corporate database that exists. We wouldn't even allow this stuff into a corporate database. Tons and tons of information. But it's also all linked. And the links contextualize. Every time you link something, you're adding, just as when you categorize something, you're adding to the information. You're saying, when you categorize, you say, oh, this is a mammal. Good, you just add information to this thing. When you add links, you're also adding information. But it's messy. It doesn't go together well. It's inconsistent within one site and across sites. Okay, but it's rich. It's rich with ideas, information, context, implications, the explicit, the implicit. That's what we've been doing for the past 15 years. We've thought that knowledge is settled, and one of the things that the web has done, the internet has done, for better and for worse, is to unsettle knowledge. Knowledge used to follow the path of publishing. That is, when you publish, you work on something in private, and then when it's done, you publish it, and once it's published, it's done. And you have a strong interest in defending it. And you do the revision, the errata, the correction if you have to, but it's embarrassing. It's done. And once it's done, it's done. Well, things on the web are never done. They're never done. Wikipedia is the greatest example of it ever, but it's certainly not just Wikipedia. It's everything you post that has comments on it, or your willingness to go back and to fix it up and to change it, to send it around and to redo it. Nothing is ever done on the web, which is both good and bad. The good part is that in proper circumstances, it just gets better and better. It gets richer and more reflective of and the bugs get driven out of it. You know, that's why things on the web have version numbers, because they're never, ever done. But it turns out that doneness is not a property of knowledge, it's a property of publishers. It's a property of printing presses. This stuff is very loosely ordered. We've had to divide things into topics because that's how books work. You know, you only got that much space, so you better define a topic, and a topic is something that fits within the 300 pages of a book. But that means severing information. That means remove, just as adding things to categories or adding tags adds information to them, severing things into topics also removes information from them. So for example, at Britannica, the philosophy topic in the Macropedia is 180,000 words or so, which is like 3 good-sized volumes. That's a lot of philosophy. At Wikipedia, it's a mere 9,000 words. Now 9,000 words is actually a very long Wikipedia article. It's longer than the recommended length of a Wikipedia article. So nevertheless, it's 1/20th. So how do we decide who has a better or more complete philosophy section? It certainly, from this it certainly looks like Britannica, but you know that those 9,000 words are intensely linked. Every other word in the article is linked just about. And those links spread out all over. They don't just go to philosophy. So there is literally no way of figuring out how much philosophy Wikipedia discusses. And that's not just because we don't have the patience or the grad students to be able to click on all the links, so that 2 million articles in English, that does matter. It's that even if we did, we wouldn't know where to stop. We wouldn't know exactly if does this article count as philosophy? I'm not sure. It sort of does. It's about the economic conditions in Germany when Hegel was writing. Is that philosophy? I'm not sure. Maybe. This one's about music. Well, there's some philosophers who think that music... we can't know how many topics at Wikipedia touch on philosophy because we don't know what philosophy is. It's not a bounded topic, despite the fact that there's a beginning and an end in Britannica to the topic. So in some ways, I would say Wikipedia is a far better reflection of the richness of ideas and the limitations that topics impose on us, the severing of information that topics causes. When we have all of this internetworking, we have so much stuff, so much metadata by which we can recommend stuff to one another and pull things together, the only possible way of succeeding, of making our way through this, and this was not foreseen by the early information doom theory people, we'll do it together. We'll do it socially. And we do this all the time. We do it when we make lists. We do it when this is, Dig and other sites, recommendation sites like that. We do it in blog posts where we recommend. We link and we say, here's something you should read. Go away from my site. Go read something else. This little act of selflessness. We do it all the time. We're together recommending and explaining why. We do it with mailing lists. Mailing lists are a phenomenal example of social knowing, where somebody posts something and somebody else comments. And even if the person who wrote the first article is a wonderful expert on the topic, the fact that people are responding to her and asking questions and taking issue and she's responding means literally the mailing list is smarter than the smartest person on it. Which also means, by the way, that one of our old ideas about knowledge, that knowledge is in our heads, can't be right. Because the knowledge in this mailing list is exactly between everybody. So we're getting, these are 4 quick examples, but you know that these are the meagerest set of examples, that the web, the internet overall, is full of new ways to make one another smarter, to know more together. It's maybe the single most exciting thing that we've been doing on the internet, and I would say culturally, since the mid-90s. So if you open up Britannica at random, and I pick on them because they are by traditionally taken to be the greatest English language encyclopedia. If you open it up at random, you are right to believe what's in there. Simply by being included, something has credibility. Whereas if you were simply to open up Wikipedia at random, the fact that something is in Wikipedia doesn't by itself confer credibility because you might hit it at the moment that some jerk went through and trashed the whole thing. So that's not where Wikipedia gets its credibility. Now I think Wikipedia generally has a lot of credibility. So my question isn't, my question is, where does it get its credibility? We know Britannica gets its from a chain of credentialed experts and processes, and that works really well. It doesn't scale all that well, but it works really well for 65,000 articles in the Britannica. At Wikipedia, they don't have a chain of credentialed experts. You are actually not allowed to mention your credentials as an argument in favor of what you are arguing for. So it's very much not a credentialed chain. So where does it get its credibility? And it's from a few places. It's from people's familiarity with the topic and with the talk pages. But I want to point to one particular thing especially, which is that Wikipedia encourages us to stick in these labels that say this article is not up to snuff. Not good enough. There are over 100 of these. They read like a list of the ways an encyclopedia can go wrong, and if you come up with a new one, you need a new one, just go ahead and make it. It's Wikipedia. Right? Put it in the library. Somebody else will use it. So a long list of these that includes doesn't meet quality standards, appears to contradict another article, appears to contradict itself, not worthy of an encyclopedia, needs to cite more sources, reads like an advertisement, reads like a sermon. And then there's the really important one, which is neutrality has been disputed, because as you know, Wikipedia is all about trying to come up with neutral articles expressed in neutral language. So it seems clear to me that Wikipedia's willingness to put in notices of its own weakness, its own fallibility, makes it more credible. That these notices tell us immediately, instantly, that Wikipedia is on our side. It's not trying to be more than it is. It's not trying to be the infallible expert. It just wants us to understand our world better. And if an article is not doing the job, then that's really important metadata, and it's totally open. It encourages you to stick these up there, because that's how Wikipedia gets better, and it's how we understand better what the individual articles are saying. Wikipedia's willingness to acknowledge its own human fallibility makes it more credible. And the question is why you will never see this here. And in part it's because there's an economic and cultural investment in appearing authoritative. But it's a rejection of the most simple fact about humans, which is that we're fallible. We make mistakes. This is from the beginning how we've differentiated ourselves from the divine. We go wrong all the time. All the time. We don't get anything right. And when we do, we don't agree about what we've gotten right. We are the fallible ones. And the unwillingness of institutions, whether it's the Times or some other newspaper or an encyclopedia or a textbook or a teacher or a politician or a museum, that the insistence on speaking in this tone of voice, we're the New York Times and we're here to tell, that increasingly is going to alienate us. It increasingly is going to drive us away. We're going to think these people are uncomfortable with being human. And we don't want to deal with, we don't like people like that. Right now it's a really big digital world. We don't have to deal with them. And so we won't. So you remove control, you increase the amount of metadata, you provide infinite space and infinite connection, and you end up with knowledge taking on these characteristics. It's unsettled, it's complex, it's messy, and so forth. But these are also characteristics of being human. And these are also characteristics of the net. What characterizes the net is that it's noisy, it's messy, it contains difference, it's imperfect, it's always more wrong than it is right, it's complex, it's poorly or it's disorganized, it's non-organized, it's fallible. These are characteristics of the network. They are also characteristics of being human. In a sense, this completely should not be surprising. This is basic McLuhan. The medium of knowledge has been books. Now the medium of knowledge increasingly is the internet, so it takes on the characteristics of the internet. The thing that's of its medium, the thing that's interesting to me is that those characteristics are so profoundly human. So I want to end with just a quick nod to a couple of problems, a couple of challenges, opportunities, no, just problems. So, and I will be very brief. The first is that we have to get really good at metadata. There is so much writing on getting metadata right. Because in a digital world, there's no difference between the content and the metadata to begin with. It's all mixed up, all content is connection. And because the only way of managing in the world this gigantic flood of information is through metadata. So we have to get better and better and better at metadata. We've been getting really, really good at it, but we've got to get even better at it. And the issue is that we don't know, we don't agree, it's not settled what it means to get better at metadata. We have many, many sides here, but we have one set of people, for example, who think that better at metadata means more rigorous standards, more controlled vocabularies, a semantic web that to one degree or another does a knowledge representation that's well ordered, not hierarchical perhaps, but well ordered. So we have, to some people that's what it means to get better at metadata. And to other people it means having better translation systems between metadata systems. And for other people it means throwing open the floodgates of metadata, allowing everybody to tag and to add metadata of any sort, and then figure out later the best as you can how it all goes together. And for somebody else it means picking up the implicit metadata. We don't agree about what it means to get better at metadata. But that's okay, because we need to get better in all of those ways simultaneously. We need to get much, much better at metadata. We're doing really well. We're doing incredibly well. But this task is not going to end. This is going to be a perpetual task for us, for our culture and all cultures. Second issue is there are those of us who are web optimists, web utopians. That's me, for example, who look out at the web and we see the web is where we join together in diversity and love difference and enjoy embracing all of that. That's one view. And the other view says, no, take a look around, wake up, smell the coffee. Web is a set of bunkers, echo chambers, where people talk only with people who are like them. So this is a hugely difficult question. I'm not going to address it at the moment. As I say, I tend towards the first, but I certainly recognize the seriousness of the second position. I think that's true also. We do both those things. The conclusion that I'm going to draw, rather than trying to resolve this question, because it can't be resolved. There's something going on underneath the question that's making the question unresolvable. The conclusion I draw, therefore, is, as a web utopian and web optimist, good, but we really have to work on diversity. That encountering of difference is not going to happen enough just by itself. The web the existence of the web, of the internet, is not going to cause world peace. It's not going to cause people to appreciate difference. This is something that we continually will have to work on, just as we work on metadata. We don't naturally get interested in that which is radically unlike us. And so we need to do that which is unnatural over and over and over again. And we're going to fail at it. We are never going to achieve the sort of peace in difference, not peace in difference, sorry. We're never going to achieve that sort of peace naturally. It's going to require massive, continual, heartbreaking effort. But that's okay, because we're in an age of abundance. You know, we have this opportunity now. We didn't have. So even if we're in the worst of bunkers and that view is almost entirely right, we have an opportunity we've never had because we have such an abundance of content, but more important, an abundance of connection. We also have an abundance of crap. The internet is more of everything. It's more of the good and it's more of the bad. It's more spam and porn and trash of and hate of every sort, but it's also more art and love and genuine friendship and caring. It's all of those things. It's more of everything, which is the opportunity that we have. Now, it turns out we are far better at dealing with the abundance of crap. We know how to do that. We've been dealing with an abundance of crap for a long time, and on the net, we're pretty good at it. So there's way too much spam, but most of us still manage to get our email done. We've worked out solutions, better or worse, that work on spam, and we have the family-friendly filters in place for our kids, and so forth. We know how to deal with the problem of too much bad. It's the problem of too much good that's really driving us crazy. That's what's terrifying to us. There's so much good. We don't know how to sort it, organize it, find it, recommend it, how to evaluate it, how to evaluate it against other. The enormous amount of good is the real challenge facing us. It's not such a bad challenge to have as we exit the age of mere information with pain, but also with some joy. Thank you. So we're going to have questions and talk, I believe.
Yeah, questions. And please come to the microphone.
Hi. Some of us have been doing a thought experiment where we imagine that our job is to put the Smithsonian out of business. If we were a bunch of young titans or wanting to create a collecting institution now, what might we do to make our current institution essentially irrelevant?
Thank you for that question. Oh, I guess I have to be behind you for the microphone. Well, so this is the healthy exercise that businesses go through, usually on offsites, and then they go drinking. So you should keep that in mind. It almost always ends in group drunkenness. So you have an enormous amount of physical stuff that's really valuable, important, and you need to maintain. So I'm going to leave that aside. I'm taking that for granted, correct? Okay, because you're not proposing the, digitizing and bonfire afterwards. I don't.
There's a core mission of collection stewardship that we are deeply in love with.
So I'm sorry. You're welcome. So I don't think this will be helpful. But one of the things to do, I'm involved in a. I'm going to leave that aside. Okay. So one of the things to do is to think about, to state the obvious, is to, whenever possible, to aggregate metadata rather than be a collection of pointers rather than of stuff. Especially, we're talking about digital stuff. There's frequently no reason to own the stuff and probably no possibility of owning it. And that trying to own it is going to get you into scaling issues anyway, because it's going to take much longer. And you're going to, whereas pointing, the pointers are going to break. Of course they are, but 404 is a fact of life online. Aggregating as much stuff as you can simply as metadata moves you zippily along and covers some part of your mandate. I don't know, that's not going to put you out of business, but there is a continuing business that you need to be in. And part of your continuing business is also going to involve physical objects. So that part of it, I don't see how you get put out of business when you're dealing with the physical. I have a feeling I'm addressing this particularly miserably. Would you like to expand on my inadequacy?
I think one of the questions we wrestle with is how to establish reputation and trust now. A long time ago, it was enough to own 100 million objects.
143, isn't it?
137, and I've just read online that we're going to digitize all of them. Did you guys hear that? And I think your comment about pointing is very apt, and also about collection stewardship. We own 137 million, but there are countless more that we don't and never will that are germane.
Oh, I have nothing else. I'm sorry. Oh, so I will just say, I'm sorry. In terms of authority, the institution has a huge amount of authority. So I really like the fact that Library of Congress puts its little badge up at Flickr. That's really important metadata. I want to know that it's the Library of Congress who's telling me how the photos were digitized rather than, or taken, rather than just somebody. So I wouldn't be shy about establishing and using marks of authentication. Authority is metadata, and it's you're in a position to use it where you actually have the authority. I mean, why not?
I'm sure you've been asked this, but how come I sort of sense with everybody can tag and everybody can do everything that it's somewhat anti-intellectual?
Because most people are not intellectual and resent people who are.
Thank you.
Have you not been paying attention to politics in the past 50 years? So this is, it's clearly an issue. The good thing about tagging is that a folksonomy is not simply a replacement taxonomy, where you take the work of professional taxonomers and you say, nah, we're going to go with what the sweaty crowd thinks, and and replace it with a single folksonomy. So the good thing about folksonomies is that there are multiple ways through them. And so you may discover that people are thinking, they're tagging, I'm sorry to take a political example, but that's all I think about these days. So you may discover that people are tagging Obama Muslim, which he, by the way, he's not. And know and so you may not want to make that at the head of your taxonomy because you know that it's wrong. And yet, in a folksonomy, I'll make it up. Let's say 70% of the tags are Muslim and 20% are Christian and 5% or whatever. You can surface you can use all of that information to help people find information. It's not the winner takes all. It's the presence, even a single tag that somebody has applied may be useful. Maybe only one person tagged that photo Quaff or Rosie the Riveter. Nevertheless, that will show up somewhere in a search and be a useful way in. So I'm not suggesting, and I don't know anybody who is suggesting, that we throw out the work of trained professionals and replace them with the anti-intellectual and sometimes quite ignorant and sometimes quite hateful tagging and so forth of the crowd. Rather, the aim is to create this mess where there are as many different ways through the information as possible, including the valuable work done by the professionals. We don't want to lose that.
Hi. I work for a news organization, and one of the things I wanted to maybe discuss was you were talking about curated news versus Wikipedia, and I just read an article not too long ago that was talking about how Wikipedia may replace the New York Times as a factual news site because it's more open and curated, and it's not curated. It's centric. It's not coming down from the top. Do you think that that's a possibility, that Wikipedia could replace curated news sites? And also, one of the things that I was thinking, in the New York Times, I don't know if you've noticed recently, but the most emailed articles are the op-ed articles. It's not so much the fact-based articles that people are going to the news for anymore. It's more opinionated information.
All right. So I don't know. I think it would be an act of foolishness given, if you'd asked 6 years ago, do you think that a wiki would ever replace the Britannica? And you'd have to be crazy to predict anything close to the success of Wikipedia, right? It's totally out of the blue, to the extent that Wikipedia has replaced, but, which it hasn't. So I don't know what will replace the New York Times. Something will, and it may be the New York Times. The New York Times would desperately like it to be the New York Times. There are some things. The editorial function left the newsroom a long time ago, about 10 years ago, that for people who are online, which is, say, probably all of us that we're getting our news from online, we are going to the major news sites, but we're also getting an enormous amount of our news not from those sites. We're getting them through the new front page, which is continuous. It comes through our mailbox. It's on blogs. You read a blog and you get an interesting link and you click on it, it leads you somewhere else. And, oh, I didn't know this about her or about him. And you get an email, especially in this season, you're getting dozens every day saying, did you know that John McCain or Obama or whatever, and you follow that. That's the new front page, and it has been for 10 years, and it's curated in this haphazard way. The editorial function is mainly the recommendation engine that is the internet. It's mainly your social group, your extended social network that's providing the editorial function, for better or for worse. And I think there are reasons to think it's for better. There are also some reasons to think it's for worse. Editorial function already left the newsroom. What's left there are investigative reporting, which is expensive and very hard to do, and we don't have good sources for doing that yet. General purpose coverage, which generally is not being done except at the local level by the newspapers. Rather, the wire services are becoming more and more important as the foreign news bureaus get shut down. And the sort of magazine stuff that magazines do, like op-eds and analysis, much of which is tremendously interesting and important, which is why the top articles in the New York Times are the op-eds and other feature-like articles. There is just no telling how this is going to shake out. And I have zero predictions, and it's the only realistic prediction at all. I don't know what's going to happen to investigative journalism. I don't know how we're going to do that. I don't know if we're going to do it, which is a pretty scary thought. I don't know how we're going to get coverage. Are we going to be satisfied with having two or three wire services that provide the bulk of international coverage? Maybe we will. I don't know. There's a certain commodification of news that's happened. So that the coverage stuff, which used to be the hallmark, now every other website has, they have the feed from the AP on the right-hand frame. There's a certain commodification that's already happened. This is one of the most interesting, scariest, and maybe hopeful areas that we're in. I don't know. I wish I did. You know, the fact that for some of us, the first inclination is when you want to know about, say, Sarah Palin or some other new topic is to go to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia generally doesn't disappoint. Wikipedia generally has a really, you know, Fox is all biased and the liberal media are all biased, and there's Wikipedia, and the article has been argued by both sides, and it's pretty factual, and it's highly neutral. I'm surprised that's where I go, but that's where I go, and you know, it's usually pretty good.
Actually, I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and maybe you can answer it. It sounds like you're still accepting that nomenclature is here to stay, especially through metadata and data. But in fact, classification schemes all the way from Linnaeus to Library of Congress to, you know, all the classification schemes out there are really on their way out, and if not on their way out, have to be changed, not only philosophically like phylogeny or whatever, but also in terms of actual physical arrangement. The arrangements book and the Library of Congress, you know, the call numbers and all that kind of stuff. It sounds like in the future that's all gone, but maybe nomenclature will stay.
So, people organize things for a reason, right? They have some interest. And in the case, say what? Well, yes, but when you organize your CDs at home, if you have CDs, or your books or whatever, or your silverware, you're doing it for a particular reason. You don't alphabetize your spices because it's not worth it. You don't have that many, and you want to put the most used ones up front. And so there's some, you know, reason why you're organizing. There isn't a natural organization. When you are organizing materials without knowing why people are going to be interested in them, as a library typically has to do, then you are under this remarkable, you have to engage in this remarkable enterprise of trying to come up with a classification system that is not driven by interests. We know how to do it by interest and clarifying things. Oh, I want the hot spices first because I use them all the time. That we know how to do. Coming up with a general purpose organization of spices, how people are going, or of books, is extraordinarily difficult. The question is whether, in what cases will the amount of effort that it takes to do that be worth it? I don't know that if we were starting from scratch building library, you know, book libraries, that we would try to come up with a Dewey system. I suspect not. Or with a Library of Congress system, which maybe we would. But maybe not. I don't know if we were to do that, if we were to think about digital materials and how we're going to find stuff, if we would want to come up with that sort of classification scheme. For digital materials, I suspect not. But we do have these things. There's an enormous amount of labor and intelligence and value built into them, an enormous amount of information built into them. It seems to me foolish to cast all that aside. We're in the fortunate position in the digital world of being able to use as many multiple schemes as we want. So there may be times when you want to browse in a Dewey-like fashion. That's great. Maybe you can suck Dewey into a faceted system and make Dewey more usable. So I'm sorry, the complex answer, not very satisfying. First is, there are going to be times when we want controlled vocabularies, when we want to have strict hierarchical taxonomies because that serves some purpose. Great, that's more information we can use. Starting from scratch, at times where we used to think that the only reasonable way of organizing is in that manner, we're going to say no, it's really not. And in many, many instances, whether we have even if we have one of these systems and we're building it, we're going to get more value out of it by also opening it up. by a University of Pennsylvania library system. Allow people to start doing the tagging in addition and have that as a second, a third, an nth degree of organization that's available. This, yes, you want as many layers as you possibly can, as many ways of sorting and ordering, because there's value in almost all of them. So why are you dissatisfied with this answer? No, is there another question? Yes, of course. But you have to use the microphone so that we can all learn what you're thinking.
I'm just, you led me to rethinking about the Library of Congress classification scheme and how ineffective it is in some categories, in some subject areas. For instance, in the scientists, natural sciences, when you're splitting up an animal instead of having the whole animal together, or in art, when there's no particular classification scheme that works well for photography, things like that. And so I'm trying to, and you said something that was helpful to me, this idea of people having added tags and other layers so that you're mixing up the information. Sounds like it might be helpful.
So you see at eBay, there is an informal taxonomy that controls vocabulary that emerges. So if you want to find laptops, you should look, I can't remember which it is now, you should look for portable computers, not for laptops. Or vice versa, can't remember the example, sorry. And this is a strictly folksonomic thing, because people who are trying to sell their laptops discovered that they got more hits if they called them portables than the laptops, and the next person did, and so forth. So there was a sort of inertia towards laptops. So that's fine. I mean, doesn't really matter which one you call it, but it's good to have one, and it's good to know what the controlled vocabulary is. If you're going to sell your laptop at eBay, it would be nice if eBay told you, well, there are 10,000 laptops and 100 million portable computers, so you could make up your mind which one. Surfacing that sort of metadata is really, really useful. But it's also useful that eBay has its own taxonomy that you can scroll through, and it's actually, I don't think it's very good. I find it fairly confusing. Nevertheless, there are times when you want to use that too because of an ambiguous term and you want to get search only within its one category and so forth. All these things are useful. It's fantastic that eBay has all of these things. Amazon is actually an even better example. The layers of sorting and organizing techniques that they provide is dozens, literally dozens on any one page, ways of working through their site. Because sometimes you want to find books that other people like you read, and sometimes you want to find, you know, the statistically improbable phrases thing they do, where they analyze the content, they find phrases that are, well, statistically improbable, and they show them to you and they let you search for other books. So if you want to find other books, for some reason you want to find other books that use the phrase heathen harpooner, you can. And if 2 people on earth ever did that and bought a book, Amazon's really, really happy. Because it didn't cost them anything. It cost them a couple of CPU cycles. So do everything. That's all we want. You know, it's very simple. Just do everything. Yes, sir. I will repeat your question in my own terms.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right behind the camera.
At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned how it's become fashionable recently for people to consider DNA as information. And you indicated how you didn't think that was quite accurate, that it was just these little squiggly bits of stuff. And I'm wondering, in what way does DNA not meet the litmus test for being considered officially information?
Information is an abstraction. So there are physicists, there are quantum physicists, who would handily beat me in an argument, or possibly to a pulp, who maintain that information is a physical thing, and subatomic theory is only understandable if we say that subatomic particles are themselves information. I've read the books. There's a great one by Charles Seife, S-E-I-F-E. I don't understand them, and so there's a good chance I'm just plain wrong. Okay? But as I understand it, information is founded on the notion of the bit, and the bit is a symbolic element. Right? A bit in a computer is the state of electricity, of voltage. And it's just by convention that we choose high voltage is on or 1 and low voltage is 0. That's symbolic. That's why Kurzweil representing his brain in a computer can't be Kurzweil. We could do the same thing with beer bottles. I'm not sure whose example this is, by the way. Where you hire 100 billion graduate students, beer bottles, down is off, up is on. You have the 100 billion neurons modeled that way. You send them instructions saying, okay, neurons, beer bottles 1 through 7, and give them a complete instruction set. And so they're turning their beer bottles up and down like this in sequence in order to stimulate Kurzweil's, the brain state of Kurzweil when he first saw his wife and fell in love. And that's a symbolic representation. It's information. It's not a brain, it's not consciousness, it's not experience. Similarly, somewhere there's a cloud of 100 million dust particles, and each off in the galaxy somewhere, and each is spinning this way or that way. And if we say left is, counterclockwise is on and the other is off, then it's Kurzweil falling in love. If we, however, say, no, the other way is on, the other way is off, then it's Kurzweil tasting strawberry ice cream. Information is symbolic. There's a huge amount to learn about DNA by considering it as a code. But it is not a code. It's a squishy molecule. And you can, in fact, trace the metaphors that we use, the framing that we use for talking about DNA back through the history of information. And there's some very good books that do this. I can't remember the name of the one I'm thinking of. The genetic mechanism, DNA, was initially talked about in terms of a lock and key or a template. You got RNA and it's a template and it reads off. It's a perfectly sensible way of doing it. Or talking about a lock and a key. Once information theory started coming out of World War II, which includes not just the noise stuff, but also the cryptography stuff, which is also, that's where we get the coding of messages. That the action of spies became the metaphor for communication. That the coding stuff goes into information theory and comes out the other side, and DNA now is a code. DNA is not a code. It doesn't have messages. It's a miraculous molecule, but it's not a code. And we can treat it as a code. We can learn a lot about it. We can treat it as information. I'm fully in favor of that. I'm not a Luddite, but it's not information. Moving on. Thank goodness for Stephen Colbert and his...
In the same way that the Smithsonian Institution is enamored with collections care, we're also enamored with our own authority. And it seems to me that you've articulated connectivity and fallibility as two ways of augmenting authority in this new world order. And I'm wondering if you have any other suggestions about the ways in which that metadata can be cultivated.
Okay, so I'm going to answer a slightly different question, and maybe get yours. So, on the one hand, we want institutions to talk in human voices and acknowledge fallibility, and I'll stand by that. But I also want to modify it a little bit. In business, for example, we want the same thing. And we also want, in particular areas, for the business to speak in ways that they're held accountable for. And I'm not talking about Enron and that sort of thing, though that too. I mean that when you look up the specifications for the washing machine you just bought, you want the company to be right. And you assume, simply by the format of the page, because it's in a table of specifications, that they measured accurately, and if they didn't, you're going to sue them because it's not going to fit in the hole you just saw it. And for that, we don't want a lot of argument and a comment board afterwards and authority waiting. We just want it to be right, and it better be right. There's a commodification not only of news, but of facts. And it started a long time ago, but the creation of almanacs did a lot for that. That here's a set of facts that you just look it up. You don't argue about it. You just look it up, and you expect it to be right. There's stuff in business that we want, and there's stuff from you that we want as well. So the basic facts that in the Library of Congress example before, what we know about the photo, we expect you to be right about it. And we don't expect you to, burn in hell if you got the date wrong or something. But we don't want to argue about it, just be right. And so one of the tasks is to figure out what that level of commodified fact is and to be bold and brazen about it. Don't worry about it. No, we got this one right. We know when this entered the collection. We know who painted it. It's right. But also then to allow, because you're going to get some of that stuff wrong too, of course, to allow mechanisms by which there in fact can be some feedback and say, you know what, I think actually this was in my family's house till 1947. I think you got the date wrong or whatever. There's this balance, this mix, this impossible mix to get entirely right that you now, I believe, need to be engaged in, where some of it's commodified, even that stuff needs to have a feedback mechanism and some room for discussion, but don't be ashamed of it. It's at the higher levels of interest that the voice of authority becomes more interesting. And so the rule of thumb here, I think, is what is it that people are going to want to talk about? The stuff that we don't want to talk about, like what year was it painted, that, fine, just state. The stuff that's more interesting, that we want to hear from experts. We're going to value what they have to say us. We're going to read the marker next to the sign, and we're probably going to, somebody's going to disagree with part of it. And it'd be good if there are ways to surface that disagreement, not on the sign, but somewhere. So this is an incredibly mixed up area. There is no one area where mere authority works. There are times when we just don't use slang. Don't say, it was like painted in 1497, man. That's not, we don't want that. We just want it, 1497, say it. And you have to figure that out. And there isn't, I don't know what the hints are for doing that.
Hi. Those of us who are at some of the museums here, work at institutions that are considered almost kind of, places of pilgrimage, once, twice, kind of 3 times in a lifetime, places of visitation. That kind of model seems pretty different than the world you're describing. So, and this is a couple of things I've been thinking about. So one is, in the context of what you're talking about, first of all, what do you, I can ask you to generalize, but I guess what would you want from a museum, from the physical manifestation of a museum? And the second is, in the world you're describing, either physically or online. In my case, I work with online manifestations in museums, so I'm always thinking about what's the relationship between the physical and the digital manifestation of my institution. So in that context, what do you see as the difference between museums and libraries as we move into the...
If you got me good and drunk and forced me to answer about the future of libraries, I'd probably say that libraries are becoming museums. There's also, insofar as they're libraries, insofar as they're collections of books, that is. The social space of libraries in towns, local libraries, will evolve away from museums, I think. But the collections area feels to me like it's likely to become more like a museum. Physical museums have to make decisions about what they're going to put where and what's going to be interesting, and curators do wonderful jobs of doing that. And I understand that that's very difficult. There's an art to that. We don't yet have the hardware we're going to have, right? I have a prop. I didn't mean it as a prop, but it happens to be one. Yeah, that's not the prop. Oh, this is so not worth it. Oh my God, I lost my prop. Yeah, I had a Kindle when I started out today. Oh, a Kindle. So this is, it's a book reader, and it's a pretty crappy one. It's overpriced. I'm enjoying it, but so it's overpriced, and it's disappointing. We don't even know what we're going to have for a book reader. the most basic thing that you would expect in a culture that's been book-based, that's now electronic, to have a truly networked book reader. My big problem with the Kindle is it's fine for reading books, but it's not really on a network. We don't have the stuff we're going to have. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't know if it's going to be a BlackBerry or a wristwatch or a cell phone or visors or implants, or we don't know what it's going to be. But presumably, we're going to have, so it's very hard to design for the hardware we don't have. The hardware that we will have, I assume, is going to tend towards ubiquity and connectedness, so that we'll always be online, is what I'm trying to say. I have no idea what the form factor is going to be. But there's so much value to being online and connecting that to where you are physically that that becomes, I would assume, would become an important part of the museum experience. Right now I can rent a handset, and I can listen to experts making sense of what I'm seeing, and we usually do because it's very valuable. But I'm sure you know about the people creating iPods, MP3s, their own museum tours. This is, it's a sort of great example of the sort of thing I'm interested in. The ability to interact with what other people are saying, what they think about. I mean, I go online to try to understand TV shows. What happened in this TV show? That's a TV show, a work of art. A cultural object is so much richer, and being able to surface that where I am would be, it seems to me, inevitable. I just don't know how it's going to happen. Inevitably, we're going to have physical things arranged. It's the layer on top of it that what happens with that will depend upon the delivery mechanism that we have. But I assume it will be social. I assume that people will leave at least semi-persistent markers and annotations, and that we will socialize the knowing of it. Okay, so that's totally unhelpful. My pleasure. I just, we haven't invented it yet. Oh, sorry.
Two questions about searching by subject on the internet and in library catalogs. It doesn't seem very good right now because on the internet, using a search engine, that is, there's no way to search by subject that I know of. There, you can search in title, : and you put your title. And library catalogs, when non-librarians go to search by subject, they just put in what they conceive of as the subject without consulting the big red books, the Library of Congress subject headings. So some of the subjects are kind of complicated. For instance, there's for the therapists for the blind, you use orientation and mobility instructors. And I would never know that except that I'd looked it up this morning. Should library subject headings be at the basic level as thought of by Eleanor Rosch, the psychologist? Or should they be complicated, or does it matter?
With Rosch, you're thinking about her work, prototype theory, and the various levels of abstraction that we seem naturally to deal with. Is that so? The question is, should we? I don't know. Let's start with that. Subject headings are. You're never going to get everybody on the web to use subject headings. There may come along an initiative that proves attractive enough that there's some markup that people will start using to attach subject headings. For example, if Google were to say, we're going to start allowing people to search by subject : and all you have to do is put in subject : Now, they won't do that because spam, right? This is why they pay no attention to keywords, the metadata keywords that are built into HTML. Nevertheless, it's conceivable that somebody will come up with something like that. In fact, it's conceivable that we already did. We call them tags. Right? That is, in fact, what tagging is all about. Trying to come up with a single, giving somebody authority over what the subject of something is, you can do it, and there's some value there, but it turns out that what you think something is about, even as the author, is less important to me than what I think it's about as a reader. And so the reader's tagging or subject heading this, adding subject headings is always going to have more value for users than those of others. The subject headings added by professionals have more value than just, Joe or Jane Blow adding them. Nevertheless, the value is always going to be capable of being supplemented by others. There's no way of getting it right what the subject headings are. So if you're going to add subject headings, I don't know. It depends what you're trying to do. So I don't have a general answer for the level of specificity for subject headings. I mean, the idea of a taxonomy is that you have it's hierarchical. You have multiple levels. But then you end up with the problem that you had, which is it can be hard to predict. As anybody who's ever used the Yellow Pages can know, it can be hard to predict how the indexer, how the cataloger was thinking about it. Which is why it seems to me that even in those cases where strict hierarchy makes sense, and there certainly are places, and controlled vocabulary makes sense, it almost always will also make sense to allow it to be supplemented by user tagging, classification, all the rest of the stuff that we can do now. So, in terms of generality of subject heading, I don't know. I'm not a librarian. I'm not a cataloger. I'm a writer. So.
I wonder if you could comment a little bit on the idea of public space and private space on the web. For example, Google that we talk about is a search engine that's starting to affect how people put together the metadata on their websites, yet it's a private company that sells advertisements primarily. Similarly, Facebook is getting more and more into the advertising game, and even Flickr was bought by Yahoo and now is probably going to start selling us stuff more than ever. So I wonder if you could just comment on how this might look moving forward as the web, as a social space, when it has all of these private companies that are trying to get in our wallets.
Yeah, well, this is, it's too bad that it's, that, we have capitalism, and that's what drives things forward, but that seems to be the case, right? So, and I'm actually okay with capitalism when you come right down to it. I guess two things. First is that we're in the process of redrawing these lines. I understand the National Archives, for example, has privatized the digitizing of archives and is now selling them to citizens. And okay, that's a new way of drawing the line. Maybe that'll work. Maybe it won't. But we don't know what works. We don't know. We're making this stuff up. So, and Harvard has a secret contract. I mean, the fact of the contract is there, but the terms are not public, with Google to digitize its library. And I actually don't even know who has rights to which copies where. I mean, I don't know. Is that a good thing? Harvard only has $37 billion in its endowment, so it wasn't going to spend that on something like digitizing information, making it accessible openly. I mean, that's come on, let's get serious here. So was that a good thing? I don't know. It makes me a little sick at heart to know that. On the other hand, how are you going to get Google except by doing what Google did? By having it compete with Alta Vista, the previous one, and make huge amounts of money, unbelievable amounts of money that it reinvests. How are you going to build that except that way? Oh, I know how. You're going to do it the way Wikipedia was built, for free. Well, could we have done Google for free? Maybe, but we didn't. Maybe we're rewriting all of these things as we go along. And we do, especially those of us who are in public service, in the public sector, we need, as you are, you think very carefully about what the implications are of, and Harvard, educational institutions like Harvard as well, need to think very hard about the implications of taking what look like either public resources or things that would have such tremendous public good if they were made open, and handing them to for-profit companies. I wish there were a simple principle where we could say, no, never, never. In this country, we don't even have a commitment to, we have documents that are locked into proprietary word processing formats, Word. And it doesn't seem to bother anybody. This is up and down, and I don't have a general principle. It makes me queasy at times. or 5 if you make them yes, no.
Just wanted to say that this certainly throws a monkey wrench in teaching, because either we're teaching the students to look at databases, let's say, because we all purchase databases when we're an academic institution, and we tell them that this is the authoritative source, or we tell them, you be the judge. What do we do in this case? Because libraries are spending a lot of money buying database, subscribing to things, and we're selling them as authoritative.
Just to be clear, what by database?
Databases that are
Give me an
commercially
example.
produced and, or EBSCO, or if something comes from Harvard or from Columbia, you know, like the Avery Index to Architecture Journals, or I don't know what comes out of Harvard actually, but Harvard itself is the credible, institution. So,
I'm only a fellow there. I have no.
Okay, okay. Well, I meant that, you know, libraries actually spend a lot of money buying things that are authoritative, and we teach them to students as such.
Yeah, well, obviously, clearly, I believe we want to teach students to evaluate. That the old days of saying, oh no, here's the list of things and go memorize them is over, because either the list is so easy to find on Google, there's no point in memorizing them. Our 17-year-old son has, in 2 grades, been required to memorize state capitals. Why? Or it's not so easy to look up, in which case we want them to evaluate it. It's not a simple list. So in the public schools, you know, my kids gone through really good public schools in Brookline, Massachusetts, and they are told, you may use 2 sources from the internet for this report. Please go to the library. I mean, they're never going to do that. As soon as they leave school, they're never going back to the library. They're just going to go out on the internet. And so I would far, far, far rather have the teachers say 2 things. First is go out, bring back your sources, and we're going to talk about them. And start teaching students in class, here's how you tell, and here's why you should be worried about this one, and why you should believe that one. And the second thing I want students to be, teachers to be telling students is, in effect, I wouldn't quite put it this way, but go write the textbook when they're old enough. Okay, the classes, we're studying Civil War, and we're in 6th grade, and the class is going to make a wiki about the Civil War, or I don't care about wikis, but whatever. You're going to put it online and add to the public's knowledge and understanding. You're going to do this public thing, okay? And everybody's going to contribute, and some of you are going to be better at writing reports, and some of you are going to be better at raising questions or doing comments, and that's fine. We want all of that, but go build this thing as if you were writing the textbook. And all the teachers involved in looking at. That's what I would far prefer to, here's a textbook, read it, come home, we'll quiz in the morning.
So we should be judging the students on process rather than anything else resulting from it.
To a large degree, yes, I think that's right. And in particular on the socializing of the process. Your students are sitting at home, your children, if you know, are sitting at home, they're doing their homework on the computer, which means they have 4 IM sessions open and they're SMSing in between. And they're talking about sports and their friends, but they're also saying, what did you get for number 3? I don't understand the teacher's question. Oh, here's what you meant, and I'm writing this. And they're doing their homework together, which is exactly what we want. We're putting students into sort of a need-to-know situation where they're not allowed to talk. That's not how we operate. You have a question, you want to know something, you go argue with somebody down the hall. And we're not preparing them for that at all. They're doing their homework socially. We're still testing them with their heads down on blue books. It seems to me have nothing to do, and it's with how we actually learn, the opportunity for socializing learning now, and it's making them more cynical about school. No child left behind.
Well, this has been a really remarkable session with lots of interesting discussion and questions. I'd like you all to join me once again in thanking our speaker for his presentation.